offline and online? You were not there मुझे yesterday? Okay, ठीक है. चलिए, तो कल हमने industrial revolution we had completed and we have started with the topic of American Revolution. Okay, so we did not go deep inside it. We had just seen the basic concept of what was the American Revolution. So can somebody tell me what is the American Revolution?
स्पर्धा परीक्षांची तयारी करायची.
Can someone tell me what is the American Revolution? In your own words. Yesterday we have seen the concept. War of Liberation. Right. Very good. Right. Very good. Right. And one small but very significant point is missing. Enlightenment. Okay. Yes. So always remember, for world history specifically, ideas. Ideas are very important. We are studying an event because there is some idea that is pushing it. Without that idea, that event will never happen. Okay. So unless we understand and in our answers weave that idea, we will not be able to get full marks. Okay, good marks. All right. Chalo, let's get started then. Fine. So we had seen, dear students, if you remember our discussion from the Industrial Revolution, Europe has started to go into the Atlantic deep inside to find out alternate safe sea route to India. Little did they know that on the other side there are two massive continents, and accidentally they kept on discovering these areas. So first person who reached here was Columbus. Okay. Then came John Cabot. Okay. This guy is important for America. Why? Because see, this is Cabot's voyage. He had done 2 voyages, and on his second voyage, he landed somewhere here on the east coast of today's United States of America. And that is why Britain could claim this area as theirs. I have told you that these voyages were very expensive, very risky. And back then there was no Tata Birla Ambani yet who had emerged in Europe. So the only people who could fund such travels were the royalties of those times. And therefore wherever the explorers went, the national flag went with it, and that area was then claimed by that country. Do you understand this? And therefore we see the colonies will come up over here. Then came Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian explorer, and he's the guy, as I've told you, who understood that we have discovered something new. And he wrote the book. He went back to Europe and wrote the book. I told you the title of that book. He wrote the book, A New World. Ek Nayi Duniya. And this really caught the attention of whole of Europe. This is something fantastic that has happened, something that we never really knew, that huge land masses are there on the other side of the Atlantic. Yes, difficult to go there, but not impossible. We can very well reach there. And that is when, a lot more people will come. One such person was Jacques Cartier of France. Okay? I'll tell you where is Jacques Cartier. All right. So this is Cartier, who had done exploration over here. And this is why in early phase, the French had control over what is today modern day Canada. If you go to Canada today, the language primarily is English. I'll tell you the history, how things change later on. After that, it is French. Why is it French? Because to begin with, the first exploration was done by the French explorer, and for a substantial period, French had control over this area. Do you understand this now? Okay. And the third most popular language there, any guesses? After English and French? Third most popular? Chinese? No. Any guesses? What could it be? Third most popular? Italian, no. Okay, those students who are online, I expect you also to participate and answer the questions. What could be the third most popular language? Spanish. See, there's always a hint. If a teacher is pushing you, guess, it means something closer to you. Something that you would probably, know or at least could take an educated guess about. Punjabi. Okay. I had a friend of mine my school time friend, who migrated around that time only, 10th standard, somewhere that time. Just before his 10th, he migrated. And then back then, communication, internet utna tha, but it wasn't that common. So he gave me a call from there one fine morning. And before going, he was learning, he and his entire family, because full family was migrating. So they were learning French. And I asked him, is the French helping you? And he told me it would have been better had I learned Punjabi. Because Punjabi there's so many people from, both Pakistan's Punjab and Indian Punjab who have migrated, especially Indian Punjab. There is, over the last 3 to 4 decades, it was always there, but over the last 3-4 decades, especially, there has been a sort of a craze almost to go to Western countries, particularly among them in Canada. Okay, chalo. Okay, so this is how Europeans arrived there in Europe. Okay, so jahan bhi ye jayenge, what will they do? They will start to build their colonies. Understand that flow of history. Okay, so people who went to America, who were these people who went to America? Back then, the travel was not easy. Crossing the Atlantic was very risky. There was a high probability that you will perhaps not even make it, because there were storms, there were pirates, there were wild tribes. On the other side, you don't know what is waiting for you. There is no proper government system structures which will help you to settle over there. Things are very crude. So if still people are going on the other side, there must be some strong motivation. ठीक है ना? क्यों जाना चाहते हो भाई? Right? So what were the motivations of these people and why they went there? First in that were people who went because of religious beliefs. Okay? Europe was an intolerant place. Okay? Sectarian differences, clashes, persecution, pretty common there. And therefore, a lot of people wanted freedom of religion. And one of the foremost, human history, if we see, one of the foremost motivation that a human being has is, that connect with God. I believe in a God who is of a certain type. And this is the way I want to worship my God. And if I'm not allowed it over here, then I'm ready to risk everything. Okay, just because wherever I go, I'll get that freedom. So a lot of people who went to America, not just the British America, but other places also, they went there for freedom of religion. Do you understand this? And this is why freedom of religion is a fundamental tenet in USA even today. Do you get this? This is why it is a fundamental tenet over there. People, every year USA has a commission for religious freedom, which comes out with a report for countries world over where there is religion-based persecution going on. Tentatively, somewhere around September, this report comes, and often they criticize other governments, including India also, that other religions, हर country में minorities होती हैं, so जहाँ भी they perceive that there is persecution, they talk about it, and then it becomes a current affairs news. Got it? Did you understand the context now? Okay. So this is first type of people. The second type of people who went were convicts. Okay. See, British government wanted population over there because you have such a massive land, you have resources. But how are you going to benefit from that if you don't have your people there? You need white settlers. And I told you motivation was hard to find. So they convinced the convicts. Either you stay in the jail for the rest of your life, or You go as a free man there, start a new life. We'll even give you land, whatever is required, but you have to go there and not come back. So a lot of convicts also went. Got this? Okay. Later on, Australia was discovered and colonized. So this policy of sending convicts stopped with respect to what is modern day USA. And instead, they started to use Australia like a penal colony. Penal colony. And that is why, dear students, even today, up to recent decades, that has reduced a lot. But not so long ago, the white British people had a sense of arrogance when they were dealing with the Australians. So for them, the Aussies were like the lineage of their convicts. Okay, and the Aussies took a lot of objection to that kind of attitude. इसलिए इनके बीच में, although same language, same religion, part of the Commonwealth, etc., etc., but there was a hidden rivalry, and that manifested on the field in the form of Ashes Test Series. Okay, तो वो जो खुन्नस है ना, next only to India Pakistan. Why is that खुन्नस there? That खुन्नस is because of that history and the attitude, sense of arrogance that the British had. अब दोस्ती है गवर्नमेंट लेवल पर, सेम लैंग्वेज, रिलीजन, कल्चर, पार्ट ऑफ द कॉमनवेल्थ, फाइटिंग फॉर ब्रिटेन ऑल्सो. तो अब खुन्नस निकाले कहाँ ना? इंडिया पाकिस्तान तो लड़के कुछ खुन्नस निकाल सकते हैं. दे कैन डू दैट. सो वेयर डू वी डू दैट? ऑन स्पोर्टिंग फील्ड्स. डू यू अंडरस्टैंड दिस? ठीक है, चलिए. तो ये है कॉन्वेक्स. बाय द वे, अंडमान एंड निकोबार आइलैंड्स, पहले दे यूज्ड टू कॉल दैट सजा एज काला पानी. यू रिमेंबर, you know that? So two things. Why it was called Kala Pani, and I'll tell you how it was a penal colony to begin with. So Kala Pani, it was called because Britishers, they used to study Indian society, culture, religion at great depth and detail. During Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's times, when there were some British East India Company officials here, they had learned Marathi language back then. Okay? So you can imagine their curiosity to understand, to profit from that. So they knew that in India there is a belief that if you cross the seas, then you lose your caste. And that is why Indians are very fearful about crossing the seas. And generally, even today, we are, thoda sa religion ki taraf tilted society across all religions. So they devised this punishment that you will be sent across the sea to that Andaman. Okay. And therefore, even if you escape from there, where are you going to go? Because your own village, your own biradari is not going to accept you, because there was this concept of Kala Pani. This is not British name. Kala Pani basically meant कि समंदर का पानी काला है, as in not literally, it is like you will lose your status. That's why Kala Pani. And British then used that as a punishment. Did you get this? And to begin with, it was not a prison. It was an open, kind of a thing, where the prisoners were kept, as in there was no fortification, no wall, nothing of that sort. क्योंकि इंसान भागेगा कहाँ ना, समंदर है सब जगह, और मान के लेते हैं, मान के चलते हैं कि अगर भाग भी जाए तो where is he going to go? He can't go back to his society. This was the idea. But it so happened that one Afghan, Sher Ali Afridi, who was sent to Kala Pani, he was a police officer who had committed a murder, British ka. He was sent over there. He murdered a viceroy in Andaman. Okay. A viceroy had, I'm forgetting the name, I think it was Lord Reading. The only viceroy who has been killed in office was done by this Afghan, because he wanted to take revenge for what the British were doing. And then the Britishers realized that it is very risky now, because अब ये बहुत motivated type के prisoners यहाँ आ गए. पहले it was like normal criminals, but जैसे जैसे हमारा politicization बढ़ता जाता है, वैसे वैसे the people sent to Kala Pani are more and more politically motivated, so it's very risky. And that is when the cellular jail was built somewhere around late 1880s. Do you get this idea? Okay. So second were convicts. Third were the type of people who say आज कुछ तूफानी करते हैं. ठीक है, आज कुछ तूफानी करते हैं, means the adventurer types. You know, the Bear Grylls of the day. So for them it was a great opportunity. You have everything. You have a diverse geography, you have challenges, you have wild tribes, you have fighting. So जो adrenaline वाले लोग होते हैं उनके लिए this was a perfect place to go. Adventurous. Then came the smart guys, the traders. Okay, the smartest of all people, remember, are the businessmen. Okay, their motivation is very clear. We want to make profit out of this process. They are never, confused, and they are never after anything that is not materially going to help them. So the traders went there in big numbers to make money. Then went the landless peasants. You remember the enclosure movement? So this movement was catching up in Britain, and our Harry Harrier did not have land. So government told him that, okay, you have one more option. Why don't you go to USA? We will give you cheap land over there. We'll supply you with whatever is needed, and you can do cultivation. So Scots, Germans, Dutch, French, etc., all type of nationalities from Europe actually went to these 13 colonies. It was not just English people, all type of people went there. And consequently, we see that the nature of USA or those 13 colonies was more liberal and cosmopolitan. See, when you have friends who are from different regions, religions, communities, etc., then your outlook becomes more liberal and cosmopolitan. The more, closed your group is, the more, inward looking you are, the more narrow minded you are. You go to the city of Mumbai. In Mumbai, you will find it's a microcosm of the whole India. And a Mumbaikar, proper Mumbaikar will always be, very cosmopolitan in his approach. He'll welcome, he'll celebrate all festivals, he'll respect everybody's beliefs, faiths, etc. That is because of that nature of the society. And this is what we see in USA also, a more liberal and cosmopolitan nature. Got this? Okay. Next, और ये दो points, you just, because we'll, binge watch a lot of Netflix and whatnot, USA has a hegemony on the world. So we are constantly, from a distance seeing the US society. You can see these things even today over there. It's also very individualistic and independent. Individualistic and independent. You might have seen in movies that as soon as a child is 18 years old, in USA they leave their homes. आपल्याकडे कसं असतं, in our homes, till the child is married, settled, and he has the next generation coming up, till that time parents are like kind of caretakers. Once they have children, then after that parents recede into the background. Exact opposite of that. 18 years of age, and forget about the child and the parents will get lost from here. Okay, let us have our privacy now, right? That is the individualistic nature, independent nature. Why is that so? Because USA was so tough. Land is huge. If you're staying on a farm, you have hundreds of acres of farm, and the next settlement is several kilometers away. So if there is a dacoity, if there is some natural calamity, you have to be able to fend for yourself. Nobody is going to come for you. So you have to be independent. In USA there's a lot of gun culture, right? Every now and then we see that some kind of some fool goes on a rampage killing people, but they don't stop the guns. They don't ban the guns. Why? Because even today, in such a huge country, there are small pockets where people are virtually by themselves. अगर कोई attack हुआ, कोई चोरी होती है, कोई डकैती होती है, even if they call the police in those remote areas, it will take them a long time to come. They can't be sitting ducks till then. So they have to be independent. They have to be fearless. They have to be able to protect themselves. This is a culture that has evolved in that land. You understand this? Clear everybody? Okay. और आज देखिए सारे जो फैशंस हैं वो कहाँ से आते हैं? यूएसए से आते हैं. You will see that on our streets, if you go, people are wearing tattered jeans. Have you seen that? Okay. I sometimes feel that even beggars will feel ashamed at some of the jeans that people wear. Now, where has that come from? That has come from USA. Why does USA does that? Because of that individualism. I want to stand out, not blend in. Okay, everybody wants a separate identity. I hope you got this. Okay. Next, Christianity and English language. That remained common. That was the link within the 13 colonies, Christianity and English language, and also the link with England that kept them connected. भारत के केस में देखिए कि ब्रिटेन का रूल हमारे यहाँ पर में किसी भी स्टेज पे एक्सेप्टेबल नहीं हो सकता था. इट वाज फोर्स दैट हैड केप्ट इट अलाइव. व्हाई? बिकॉज we have so many differences. Neither religion nor language are same. So it was not possible for us to accept that rule. Do you get this point? So this is people who went to America. All right. Okay, let's go ahead. Dear students, I just want to show you a map quickly, and I've told you every time we study world history, or for that matter, any topic of history, it's crucial that we see the maps. Okay? When we talk about the 13 colonies, we should remember that we are only talking about this much of modern day USA. Okay? Here you have the Appalachian Mountains. You know? Okay? So you can imagine like in India we have the Western Ghat, and if you go westwards you have the Konkan coast, Western coast. So similar structure you see here also. You have the Appalachian Mountains slightly tilted like this, not exactly parallel, slightly tilted. And on the east of Appalachian till the Atlantic Ocean, this patch is the east coast. And this east coast is where the 13 colonies of America were there. Okay? These 13 colonies, because the mountains run like this, slightly tilted, that is why the colonies at the top, they are more small in size because land कम था ना, वो mountainous है. And moreover mountain की वजह से यहाँ पर agriculture बहुत कम हो सकता है. As you go southwards, the mountains are tilting away, and that's why you have bigger colonies in the south, and these colonies have massive agricultural plantation lands. ठीक है? The slave practice, मैं आगे उसमें आऊँगा. The slavery practice and all of that will be in the southern states. See how geography, decides our economy. It decides our society. It decides our culture. These people could not do agriculture. So they have to go for what? Some kind of manufacturing industry, trading, etc. They don't need slavery. These people, the natural resource that they have is huge land. I was lucky to be there in USA for that exposure in one particular program, and I have seen firsthand Texas. I was taken. So there was this one lady, single lady. She had a huge farm, and on that huge farm, I mean that farm must have been, to my guesstimate, she must have had at least 100 acres के आसपास का farm, and one single lady. She had of course servants and all that, but one single lady managing that entire farm. Isn't that amazing? That is the kind of lands that these people had. Okay. Now because of this, they needed slaves. Got it? चलिए आगे बढ़ते हैं. So we've seen the map. Now relations with England. How did the relations evolve between the 13 colonies and England? Those who are there on YouTube, just type a Y in the chat box if you're able to relate with our discussion thus far. Y in the chat box stands for yes. Relations with England. The 13 colonies had very good relations with England. Friendly relations, amiable relations. The 13 colonies were in fact proud. They were proud that they were subjects of King George. क्यों? क्योंकि पूरी दुनिया में प्रेस्टीज जो है वो ब्रिटेन की बहुत हाई हो चुकी थी. Britain had the biggest empire, the most powerful navy, and Britain was the protector. So it's like, like we have somebody who is a very powerful godfather. Don't we have that attitude? Okay, that we cannot be touched. So that is the kind of attitude that the 13 colonies had. Britain also followed a policy that was later labeled or called as salutary neglect. Okay, Aishwarya, that's great. What is meant by salutary neglect? Salutary neglect means as long as Britain's mercantile interests were not compromised, Britain did not interfere inside the 13 colonies. You remember this term mercantilism? What is this philosophy of mercantilism? What is meant by mercantilism? Okay, very close, but still slightly more precise. What is mercantilism? Yes. So every country wanted to enrich itself by maximizing exports and minimizing imports. That was the whole idea of that century. Got this? Mercantilism. Why were the colonies being created in the first place? Because of mercantile interest. They want to maximize their exports and minimize their imports. Okay? So as long as that is not affected, as long as mercantile interests are not affected, Britain gave tremendous freedom to these 13 colonies. कि तुम अपनी जिंदगी अपने हिसाब से जियो, okay? We will not interfere too much. Our only concern is भाई हमारे mercantile interest को कहीं से भी नुकसान नहीं होना चाहिए. Because of this, these 13 colonies also had some degree of self-government. Unlike in case of India, where this process was very slow and it came step by step only after a lot of struggle by Indians, American colonies में ऐसा नहीं था. American colonies had self-elected assemblies. Each of the 13 colonies had its own assembly. Yes, of course, the elections were not universal adult franchise based, very limited franchise, but nonetheless, they had elections and they had assemblies. These assemblies could also enact laws. ये अपने laws बना सकती है 13 की 13 assemblies. Caveat जरूर थे इसके अंदर में. There are 3 points. First is these laws had to take approval from Britain. Because Britain wanted to ensure कि भाई ऐसा कोई law pass ना हो which will affect what? Mercantile interest. So a check was there. Second, Britain was very possessive about its colonial empire and therefore its defense was taken very seriously. And hence governors and military commanders, they compulsorily were appointed by Britain, not by the assemblies. Okay? Because they want to keep control. No? And third, Parliament could pass laws for colonial interests that will be applicable to these 13 colonies. Do you understand this? So first part of it, good relations, salutary neglect, self-government, elected assemblies, passed laws. But the caveat is, one, laws had to be approved, governors and commanders appointed by Britain, and the British Parliament had the power to pass a law that would be applicable across the colonial possessions of Britain. Clear? These points clear? Okay. Accordingly, the British Parliament had passed many laws. Yesterday, I told you about the Navigation Act. You remember this Navigation Act? In yesterday's class, I told you about this. This Navigation Act said that all the shipping in the British Empire has to be carried out only by British shipping industry. So whatever trade and commerce is taking place, you can't use French, German, Dutch or any other shipping. You have to use what? British shipping only. Why is that so? So that British shipping gets a boost, and British shipping gets a boost helps British mercantile interest. समझ में आ रही बात आपको? Similarly, Enumerated Commodities Act. Enumerated Commodities Act referred to what? This was a list of commodities which had to be first routed to Britain and only then they could be taken to America. So when you take these goods to Britain, then there will be custom duty लेवीड बाय ब्रिटेन. 100 रुपए की चीज है, ठीक है, उस पर 50 रुपए की कस्टम ड्यूटी लगी, 150 रुपीज की अब वो हो गई, देन इट विल गो टू यूएसए. सो ब्रिटेन गेट्स कस्टम ड्यूटी इन दिस मैनर. डू यू अंडरस्टैंड? ठीक है. स्टेपल एक्ट, मोलासिस एक्ट, ऐसे और कुछ एक्ट्स पास हुए थे विच वर स्लाइट इरिटेंट्स in the relationship. Naturally, Americans did not like this. Why should Britain levy tax on our trade? क्योंकि चीजें महंगी हो जाएगी ना. 150 रुपीज. अब अमेरिकन इस पे टैक्स तो लगाएंगे ना, उनकी भी सरकार चलानी है, तो दे विल लेवी सम टैक्स. उस पे सपोज 20 रुपीज उन्होंने लगा दिया, तो मार्केट प्राइस क्या हो गई? 170, जबकि यही चीज उनके मार्केट में 120 रुपीज में भी आ सकती थी. गॉट इट? सो अमेरिकन्स डिड नॉट लाइक दिस. बट व्हाट हैपेंड वाज ब्रिटेन डिड नॉट एनफोर्स इट वेरी स्ट्रिक्टली. हो गया उतना हो गया, एंड दैट इज वाई ओवरऑल द रिलेशनशिप रिमेन्ड स्मूथ. लॉ तो है, ठीक है, हेलमेट कंपलसरी है, नहीं पहनोगे तो 5,000 रुपए का फाइन भी है, बट द पुलिस आर नॉट फोर्सिंग इट. गॉट इट? एक्सेप्शनल केसेस, कभी कभी बीच में कुछ ड्राइव हो जाता है, एंड देन if you are unlucky and you're not wearing helmet, then in that case it will be there. So it was something like that. Got the idea? So this is how the relations were there between England and the 13 colonies. Okay. Okay. Now just 30 seconds, read through these points because this is important. You can remember this like this. So these 4-5 points together. Then next, and then take your time and imbibe it. Hmm. They were coming from mostly from Britain. Assembly is there, na? Governor is there as a system to check. Okay? The laws are being passed by the people's representatives only, in that sense. And you also have to understand it a little bit in the context. Okay? You see, these are just colonies, and relatively their size is also small. There are 13 of these, na? But yet Britain was willing to give this. And this we are talking about which century? We are talking about the early part of 18th century at that point. And you compare that with India in 19th and early 20th century. So it is only in the late 19th century and early 20th century that we get some semblance of representation. Got it? So for that day and age, it was pretty remarkable. Clear, everyone? Okay. So can you try to tell me the points? They're there on the screen, but try to recall. अगर कहीं अटक गए तो have a look. But to the extent possible, try to remember. First set of 4 points. Okay. Yes. And in your own words, I don't want my words. एसेंस समझ में आना चाहिए, ठीक है ना? शब्द आपके हों, एंड इनफैक्ट कीवर्ड्स you'll have to use as it is, but बाकी आपकी अपनी लैंग्वेज, ठीक है? सैल्यूटरी निग्लेक्ट की पॉलिसी थी. What else? Okay, they had their own self government largely. कैसी थी वो गवर्नमेंट? हाँ, यहाँ कहाँ थी मेरे भाई एब्सोल्यूट मोनार्की? अमेरिका में. हम 13 कॉलोनीज की बात कर रहे हैं ना, और ब्रिटेन में भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मोनार्की थी. Okay, no, what I'm asking you is, you said self-government, that's correct. But how did it manifest? Yes. Self-elected assemblies, they were able to pass laws. Isn't it remarkable for that day and age that Britain was willing to allow this much of freedom? You got this? But Britain still had control. कैसे करता था Britain control? Okay, mercantile interest तो है ही. Governors and military commanders. Third, laws had to be approved by Britain, and British Parliament could pass laws for the colonies. ठीक है ना? Got this point? ठीक. चलिए, largely you have understood. Let's go ahead. Now, this couple, which was happily married, Britain and these 13 colonies, is going to end up in a divorce. What exactly happened? From where did these problems start? That is what we are going to try to understand now. The very famous African saying, it says, if you fall, don't see where you fell, see where you slipped. ठीक है? आप जब गिर जाते हैं तो आप किसी और पॉइंट पर चले जाते हैं, लेकिन you don't have to investigate that. You have to see where you slipped, where it actually started. That is where the original problem was. So where was that original problem? That problem was in the Treaty of Paris 1763. Do you understand this? Treaty of Paris 1763. Okay. Now this map shows you before and after. Let me explain this context. सिर्फ सुन लीजिए पहले मुझे. The pink shaded areas over here, these are the British colonies. This yellowish orange area is under the control of French. Louis was the title of the French rulers. Louis, Bourbon family, and title was Louis. कुछ रॉयल फैमिलीज हैं यूरोप की, उनके नाम हमको पता होना चाहिए. You can write down these names. फ्रांस की जो फैमिली थी, that was called as Bourbon. What is it called? Bourbon. ठीक है. Austria's family was called as Habsburg. Habsburg. Australia's royal family. ठीक है. Third, Russia's royal family was Romanov. Romanov. And fourth, Ottomans, rulers of Turkey. Ottomans. Okay. So the French ruling family was Bourbon and their title was Louis. So ये French control वाला area है, ठीक है? How did the French come over here? I told you now, Jacques Cartier, you remember that context? So through that, you have French presence over here. This green colored area is Spain, Spanish control. Okay. This is the Mississippi River. Mississippi, it's a very, जैसे यूरोप के अंदर में you have the Danube. It runs through a lot of European countries, so that's why it's a very crucial river to understand यूरोप का geopolitics. Danube. वैसे ही यूएस के अंदर में ये मिसिसिपी जो रिवर है, itself and its tributaries, it run through many states, and that is why this river is very crucial. Here you have the mountains, Appalachian Mountains. On this side of the Appalachian Mountains, but east of Mississippi, this was disputed territory between France and Britain. Okay, that's why you have both the shades over there. This is the picture that we have in USA or America before what is called as the 7 Years War. Okay, 7 Years War से पहले. Now Britain and France, these were the two major colonial powers with their possessions in different parts of the world. And consequently, since both of them were rivals, they had conflicts wherever they had colonial presence. चाहे भारत हो, चाहे अफ्रीका हो, चाहे अमेरिका हो, ठीक है, कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स होती थी. So all of these conflicts, to once and for all settle the score, both these countries fought a very famous war, which is called as the 7 Years' War. You understand this? 1756 to 1763. This period is called as the 7 Years' War period. If you read a little more deeper in history, it actually is a 9 years war and had started as early as 1754. But since declaration officially is in 1756, जैसे आप देखिए अभी recently we had India and Pakistan conflict. उसके अंदर में जब conflict शुरू हो गया था, neither of the government declared it as a war officially. Why? Because war declare करने के कुछ technicalities होती हैं. Even if the conditions might be met, countries avoid declaring it, क्योंकि जब कॉन्फ्लिक्ट रुक जाता है तो उस वक्त में डिक्लेयर अगर आपने कर दिया होगा वॉर, तो फिर उसकी जो है ना टेक्निकलिटीज को कंप्लाई करना वो सब मुश्किल होती है. एंड सिंस नेचुरली बोथ आर न्यूक्लियर पावर्स एंड इट वाज एक्सपेक्टेड दैट एट सम पॉइंट there will be international pressure and both the countries would not want to take it further. So you'll see that both the countries did not officially declare it as a war. Do you understand this? Okay. So like that here also, it wasn't an official war till 1756 and hence it's called as a 7 Years' War. तो क्यों लड़ा जा रहा है ये वॉर? किसके बीच में लड़ा जा रहा है? Who are fighting it? British and French. Why are they fighting it? To settle their disputes over colonies, ठीक है, colonial areas. At the end of this war, the picture that we see is like this. Britain was able to defeat France in this war. Across the world, wherever they fought, Britain emerged as victorious. And therefore, all of this area now was given to whom? To Britain. ठीक है. You can see France has been kicked out. ये सब लुइसियाना किसको दिया? अभी स्पेन को दे दिया है. France was kicked out and all this entire area went to Britain by the Treaty of Paris 1763. बात समझ में आई आप लोगों को यहाँ तक? Sure about this? Okay. Let's go ahead now. How did this affect the relations between the two? How did this affect? So the treaty that was signed at the end of the war was Treaty of Paris 1763, and this treaty ended the French influence in modern day United States of America or the adjoining areas. French are kicked out. अब हुआ ये कि फ्रेंच जो खतरा था वो जा चुका था. Up to this point, the 13 colonies had a fear that the French may attack us. They may take over our territory. We may lose our businesses, our properties, so on and so forth. लेकिन अब क्या हो गया? अब वो डर जो है वो खत्म हो चुका था. और जब डर खत्म हो गया तो कॉलोनीज जो है वो एम्बोल्डन हो गई. ठीक है. Britain got the area east of Mississippi River. We saw that in the map. Entire east of Mississippi. And wherever, you see, not everywhere, but in many cases, boundaries are decided on the basis of some natural features. So Mississippi के ईस्ट में ब्रिटेन और वेस्ट में स्पेन, ऐसा फॉर्मूला वहां बना. स्पेन एक्सचेंज फ्लोरिडा फॉर क्यूबा. ठीक है, ये पॉइंट इनसिग्निफिकेंट है, बस आप ध्यान में रखिएगा कि स्पेन वाज इन्वॉल्व्ड हियर. Confidence of the colonists was now high. Why was the confidence high? Because they had for the first time fought in this war. Americans were brave, क्योंकि ऐसी जगह में सरवाइव करना ये आसान नहीं होता, आपको बहादुर होना पड़ता है. बट बहादुरी से सिर्फ काम नहीं चलता. युद्ध लड़ना, टू फाइट अ वॉर, you require a different type of a skill. The Americans did not have the skill of fighting a modern war. But the 7 Years' War gave them that experience and skill. They faced off the French army, which was the second most powerful army in the world after the British, and came out successful. They also now had trained officers at their command, most famous being Washington himself. Then he was a young captain in the army and he was leading from the front. और बहुत सारे battles में इन्होंने अपनी बहादुरी का जो है वो जलवा बताया. Very seasoned, trained military officer. And like him, there were many others. So now the colonists feel कि देखिए फ्रेंच खतरा भी जा चुका है, ठीक है, ब्रिटेन के साथ लड़के हमको एक्सपीरियंस भी आ गया है. We now have officers also at our disposal. तो इस सब के एंड में we must profit because of this victory. ठीक है, और प्रॉफिट इनको क्या चाहिए था, मैं उस पर नेक्स्ट स्लाइड में आ रहा हूं. फ्रांस एंड इट्स एलाइज हु हैड बीन किक्ड आउट ऑफ नॉर्थ अमेरिका, they were now smarting under this defeat. होता है ना कि किसी ने अगर आपको हरा दिया तो आपके अंदर वो ईगो जो है ना वो हर्ट होता है एंड यू आर जस्ट लुकिंग फॉर अनदर अपॉर्चुनिटी कि कहीं मौका मिले तो हम जो है इसको दिखा दें. तो फ्रांस और उसके जो दोस्त थे स्पेन वगैरह वगैरह, they all were looking for an opportunity to humiliate Britain like they had themselves felt humiliated. So they were ready to help out Americans if at all the Americans rise up against Britain. ठीक है, ब्रिटेन इस वॉर के अंदर में जीता तो सही, लेकिन बाहर जब निकला तो इट केम आउट विद ह्यूज डेट्स. एक पुरानी हिंदी फिल्म का डायलॉग है, हार के भी जीतने वाले को बाजीगर कहते हैं. ठीक है, I have modified this dialogue for the sake of world history. हार के भी बैंकरप्ट होने वाले को ब्रिटेन कहते हैं. सॉरी, जीत करके भी बैंकरप्ट होने वाले को ब्रिटेन कहते हैं. So Britain during these centuries, right up to World War II, it won all the significant wars and campaigns, but at the cost of a huge economic debt. And that economic debt is now going to change the policy and approach of Britain towards these colonies. और यहां से फिर जो है वो टकराव शुरू होगा इनके बीच में. कंटेक्स्ट समझ में आपको? अब देखिए फ्लो फिर से याद कीजिए. फॉल ऑफ कॉन्स्टेंटिनोपल, geographical discoveries, creation of these colonies. Relations were pretty good as long as mercantile interests are maintained. Britain is allowing internal freedom. ठीक है, फ्रांस के साथ में वॉर होता है, 7 years वॉर. ब्रिटेन इज विक्टोरियस बट इकोनॉमिकली क्रिपल्ड. Colonists on the other hand are more emboldened, they are more confident, they have seen a war, they have leaders, they have Spain and France to support them. अब ऐसे में क्या होगा, जिससे होता है ना कि एक कपल अच्छे से रह रहा है और दूसरे लोगों को जेलसी हो रही है, तो दे आर रेडी टू सपोर्ट वन ऑफ द पार्टी. तू लड़, आम्ही आहोत बरोबर, यू फाइट, वी आर देयर फॉर यू. दैट इज व्हाट इज गोइंग टू हैपन नाउ. यू अंडरस्टैंड दिस? ठीक है, ओके, राइट. Now this slide will have some technicalities. I try to keep the technicalities to the minimal. क्योंकि flow समझ में आए तो आप बाद में technicalities याद कर लोगे. But there are some technicalities which are inevitable. So we have to discuss them. Let's discuss what is exactly going to happen now. After the war, there is a new Prime Minister, Prime Minister Grenville. And this Prime Minister is faced with a huge task of getting Britain out of this economic financial crisis. अब imagine कीजिए आप प्राइम मिनिस्टर हैं, you have inherited an economy which is debt riddled. What will you do? Obviously, you'll try to find new sources from where you can raise the revenue. So Grenville did not do anything different. He basically did the same thing, and therefore he starts to raise new taxes and gives up on the earlier policy of salutary neglect. ठीक है, why? Because he wants to maximize जहां से हो सकता है. कॉलोनीज को भी अब लोड उठाना होगा. This is his idea. The first thing that he did in this context was Crown's Proclamation of 1763. Slightly technical point, but you'll understand it. American जो white settlers थे British colonies में, they always had the intention, why should we stay limited to the mountains? They were there on the east of mountains. You remember the map? They felt that America has such huge possibilities on the other side also. So our colonies should expand westwards. But the problem was there was earlier France on the other side. And it was not easy to, push around the French. But after the 7 Years' War, the French are gone. And east of Mississippi River, the entire territory belongs to Britain. So अब white Americans को लगने लगा कि भाई ये तो हमारे लिए दावत रखी हुई है. We just have to cross the mountains and go and settle over there because it's British territory and we are, subjects of the British crown. But there was still one problem with it. And that problem was Native American tribes. Okay? There were a lot of what are called as Red Indians or Native Americans. By the way, you know why they are called Red Indians? Have you heard they are called Red Indians at least? So वहाँ की जो tribes थी ना, they're called as Red Indians. Okay? Why they called as Red Indians? Because Europeans went to search India and they came across these tribes for whom the ochre red color was very sacred. जैसे हमारे सिंदूर का लाल color है ना. So for their culture also it was very sacred. So a lot of their traditional costumes and the feathers that they wore, they used to color that in ochre red. So that's why a name got coined, Red Indians. You understand? Not addressed at you today. Did you get? Okay. Yes. So Crown's Proclamation of 1763. Britain के किंग ने क्या कहा कि भैया nothing doing, stay where you are, don't cross the mountains. Why? Because there are these tribes over there. इनको पहले ही हमने पुश किया था माउंटेन्स के उस पार. Earlier the tribes were on this side, but these white settlers had pushed them beyond the mountains. And many of these tribes had supported the British during the 7 Years' War. They were allies. Now, if the white people went on the other side, it will inevitably lead to conflict with the tribes. And yes, they were not modern, but they were very brave. And these were people of honor. They'll fight to death. And Britain was already under economic stress. More war means ultimately expense to badhta hi hai na. Okay? So they did not want that expense now. And hence the declaration of 1763. Do you understand this? Naturally, this disappointed whom? The white settlers. They felt, what was the point then of fighting the French? If we have the territory, if we can go and settle, then why is the crown stopping us? Got this point? Okay. This is Crown's Proclamation. Point number 1. Point number 2, after this, a series of acts were passed in the British Parliament, which became unpopular with the white settler Americans. For example, there was something called as the Currency Act. You remember our Prime Minister had come on TV at 8 p.m. some years ago? From today, rupees 500 and 1000 notes will be worthless pieces of paper. What was that called? Demonetization. So a similar thing happened in these colonies also. There was a lot of old currency, multiple currencies that were in circulation. And that had made the entire financial system very confusing and cumbersome. So British, with good intention, they demonetized a lot of these old currencies so that there will be uniformity, trade and commerce easy hoga and taxation unke liye behtar hoga. But the problem with this was the common people who possess these currencies, they went through a lot of pain. Does that happen? Did we also not experience some transitionary pain? So Currency Act, was hated by the Americans for this reason. Point number 1. Clear, everybody? Okay. Point number 2, Sugar Act. Sugar Act, Britain said that you cannot import sugar from the French colonies nearby. There were a lot of other countries for colonies. French had a lot of colonies in the Caribbean, and Britain said that America cannot import sugar from these colonies. Americans did not like this. Trade, leave that to us. No? We'll buy and sell stuff as per our need. Why should Britain on the other side decide what we buy and sell? Okay, next. Then came the Stamp Act. This was the most unpopular of all. The Stamp Act started to tax a lot of things which were never under tax purview earlier. And suddenly many items were brought under tax purview. Something as like newspapers. आप newspapers बना रहे हैं तो आपको उस पर टैक्स देना पड़ेगा. You're making cards, playing cards, games that you play. If you're making those, you will have to pay tax on it. And when you pay tax, then that particular item is stamped. That this item पे जो tax था, that has been paid. Only then that item can enter the market. Got it? So this was like the earlier system of excise tax that we had, now subsumed under GST. Excise tax was anything that is manufactured. मराठी में बोलते हैं अबकारी, ठीक है, अबकारी कर. So anything that is manufactured, the government levies tax. But here in the 13 colonies, for the first time, manufactured items were being taxed on such a big scale. So naturally, whenever you have such a big policy decision, there's a lot of pain associated with it. You're not used to paying tax on these things. Okay? So that is Stamp Act. Then Quartering Act. There are many such acts. I'm just giving you examples of 4. What was Quartering Act? The British government told the Americans that, see, for your protection, we are sending our army to America. We have to maintain those troops over there. And in many places, these troops don't have a proper cantonment, a garrison. Okay. So what you will have to do is, you will have to accommodate them in your places. You will have to provide them water. Okay. The Americans hated this idea. The Americans felt that in the first place, the British army was needed for what? It was needed for the French danger only. Now the French danger is completely gone. So why do we need this? 1. Number 2, if still they are insisting for the British army to be there and they're making us pay, the only plausible reason for this is they want to keep control on us. ये तो हमारे दमन के लिए ही रखा जा रहा है. And on top of that, they are expecting us to give them quarter. Isn't it this ironic that we pay for the accommodation of our own, so to speak, oppressors or controllers? So this also was something that was hated by the Americans. Do you understand this now? Let me quickly summarize. 7 years war ends, Treaty of Paris is signed, and after that situation is going to change. Britain was in great financial crisis. Therefore, the Prime Minister comes out with new policies which is going to spoil the relation. First in that is Crown's proclamation. Secondly, many acts were passed. Some examples of the act: Quartering Act, Stamp Act, Currency Act, Sugar Act, Enumerated Commodities Act, so on and so forth. Okay? All of these acts. So just imagine, look at it from the American perspective. 1763 तक सब कुछ सही चल रहा था और हम युद्ध जीत भी गए हैं, हमने लड़ाई भी लड़ी, टेरिटरी भी मिल गई है. अब रिवॉर्ड मिलने की बजाय हमको ये मिल रहा है. Okay, so these 13 colonies now started to come together for political purpose. Okay, before this, these 13 colonies politically were independent of each other. Okay, yes, they had trade and commerce, they had शादी ब्याह भी होते थे, people used to travel back and forth, but politically speaking, they were independent of each other, and each of these 13 colonies independently, individually was under the British Parliament. So there was no one superseding body over the 13 colonies, then the British Parliament. ऐसा नहीं था. Directly Parliament to these 13 colonies. Got it? So for the first time now they feel the need that we should come together. Got this? ठीक है? Politics क्या होता है दोस्तों? Basically, what is politics about? Politics क्या है? Those students who are there online also, can you tell me what is meant by politics? हम लोग ये वर्ड यूज करते हैं ना, फैमिली में यूज करते हैं, ऑफिसेज में यूज करते हैं, कॉलेज स्कूल्स में हम यूज करते हैं कि मेरे साथ पॉलिटिक्स हुआ है। ओके, वेरी गुड, वेरी गुड, ऑलमोस्ट परफेक्ट. What is politics? Politics is the art or struggle for attaining power. That is what politics is about. Okay. What is power then? To rule over. Okay. What is meant by to rule? Hmm? To have hierarchy. हाँ, very good. Agency to make decisions. इसको थोड़ा और मैं it's all perfect, but थोड़ा सा और ज़्यादा relevant मैं उसको बना रहा हूँ बस. Power is the ability to influence other people's behavior. What is power? अब ये दो डेफिनेशन आप लिख लीजिए साइड में कहीं पर में. What is politics? Politics is the struggle for attaining and maintaining power. ठीक है. And what is power? Ability to influence the behavior of others. ठीक है. जैसे for example, right now here in the class, if I tell you Hanumant, you have not been attentive since last 1 hour. Okay? I don't like this behavior. You'll have to leave the class right now. What will you have to do? You'll have to leave. So what is that? Behavior. I influenced his behavior. If he is not being attentive, okay, I tell him you better pay attention or you will be next. तब उसकी आंखें जो है वो पूरी खुल जाएगी. जो नींद आ रही थी थोड़ी सी वो चली जाएगी. What is that? Ability to influence behavior. It's there in classroom. It's there in your homes. You wanted to go for an overnight picnic in your college times. You ask your parents, right? You first try to convince your mother because mother is soft, you know. And then you tell her, okay, tonight let's ambush dad over the dinner table. So you started out, you first initiate, and then I'll explain how this excursion is very important for my career. Okay, so on and so forth. So your mother being mother, she helps you do that. You try to explain. Your dad listens to everything patiently without looking at you, and at the end says, this is not going to help you in your career in any way, and you're not going anywhere. You concentrate on your studies. What happens next? You call up your friends and tell, मैं नहीं आ रहा हूँ. You know, this is what happens. What is that? Dad having power. The government passes laws to do the same thing. So power and politics, they are there at every human interaction. We might not understand it. People say that politics is bad. You are doing politics. Not doing politics is also a politics. Okay? Not doing politics is also a type of politics. So whether you like it or not, you are part of politics. You are part of that power game. If you're not getting influence, if you're not influencing, then you're getting influenced. दोनों में से एक चीज होगी. You will influence people's behavior or people will influence your behavior. Got this? Clear everybody? ठीक. There's one more nice quote that came to my mind. I would want you to write it down. This quote is about diplomacy, but it is relevant to power also. If you are not at the table, if you are not at the table, then you are on the menu. If you are not at the table, then you are on the menu. Did you understand the meaning of it? अगर इस पॉलिटिक्स की गेम में अगर आप पार्टिसिपेट नहीं कर रहे हैं, ओके, तो क्या होगा? Your interest will be compromised. You are on the menu, which means you will be eaten up. Got the idea? आगे चल के मैं एक टॉपिक आपको बताऊंगा, हम डिस्कस करेंगे पार्टीशन ऑफ अफ्रीका. इसको पेपर पार्टीशन ऑफ अफ्रीका भी कहा जाता है. इन 1880s major European powers met at a congress in Berlin, okay? And they sitting several 1,000 miles away from Africa, they partitioned Africa amongst themselves. Okay, on paper, on the map, they said कि ये हमारा, ये तुम्हारा, and you'll see that a lot of African countries have very straight borders. You see Egypt. Egypt almost has like they want to teach you what is meant by a right angle. Why is that so? Because these boundaries were decided by Europeans sitting in the Berlin Congress of 1880s. What is that? Africans were not there at the table. Where were they? They were on the menu. Got this point? ठीक है, चलिए आगे बढ़ते हैं. So the Americans now realize that we are on the menu. Okay, so it's best that we come on the table. And for that reason, they first create a organization called as Committee of Correspondence to connect amongst the 13 colonies first. Okay. Then they, at Massachusetts Assembly, they protest against the Stamp Act. You remember the Stamp Act? Where was it? Yeah, here. And here they gave the famous representation, no taxation without representation. From your school times, you remember this? No taxation without representation. Okay. British Parliament में there was no elected representative from this colony. And Britain was going through that enlightenment and liberal wala idea wala phase. And there it was accepted that if a person is paying tax, then he must have a right to vote. As a matter of principle, this had been accepted. The American people said, we are paying you taxes, okay, but we don't have representation. So, going by your own accepted and declared principle, isn't this hypocrisy? Okay, विरोधाभास आएगा नहीं हम. So you have to end this, and therefore the cry or slogan of no taxation without representation. ब्रिटेन का कहना यह था, they had this concept, want you to write this down, they had this idea of virtual representation. Virtual representation. What do we mean by this virtual representation? It does not mean that there was some kind of Zoom meeting in which Americans were connected with the British Parliament. It meant that the British parliamentarians could take up the issue from across the British colonial empire. So it was not as if the British parliamentarians only represented their colonies. They virtually represented the British Empire also. So the British government told them, if you have any problems, you can contact any British parliamentarian and ask him to take up your issue. He has the right to do that. The Americans said, the way an American representative will take up our issue, obviously a British parliamentarian will not. जितक्या पोटतिडकीने आमचा प्रतिनिधी मांडणार तितका हा तुमचा करणार नाहीये. Got it? So that's why no taxation without representation. Got this idea now? Okay. Now a few facts. Later on in the notes, everything you will read about this, but this is just to make you understand. Okay. The British finance minister, they did not call him finance minister then, name technically was chancellor, but to make you understand. Townshend, he passed an act called as, series of acts that was called as Townshend's Act. Now this Townshend's Act included several new items on which taxes were levied. And once again the Americans got angry कि यार ये सब कुछ कम था कि ये अब ये नया लेकर के आए हैं. और इन आइटम्स के अंदर में एक आइटम था चाय, टी. Tea was now taxed by the British people. Americans got very angry at this. And they created a new body or organization called as Sons of Liberty. You can say this is like parallel of Indian National Congress. Just to make you understand, there are a lot of differences, but this is their leading political organization. It was also called as Sons and Daughters of Liberty. So it is not gender specific only, but लिखते वक्त में अक्सर books में you will come across Sons of Liberty, although officially it was both. This organization was led by a American revolutionary called as Samuel Adams. His name is important, Samuel Adams. He was a very dynamic, dashing kind of a person, up for action, very patriotic, and he was leading the Sons of Liberty. अब Sons of Liberty ने आवाज लगाई for protests across the country. Okay? And in these protests against the Britishers, an unfortunate incident took place in 1717 where an unarmed group who was protesting was fired upon by British troops. And some 14 people were killed and several more were injured. This was called as the Boston Massacre of 1770. Now, this Boston Massacre became like their Jallianwala Bagh moment. ठीक है? जैसे भारत में before the Jallianwala Bagh, Mahatma Gandhi had encouraged Indians to, fight in the World War I, because he genuinely believed that after World War I, अच्छे दिन आने वाले हैं. Britishers had promised कि हम reforms लेके आ रहे हैं. Just wait for the war to get over. But at the end of the war, we got Rowlatt Act. And when we peacefully protested against Rowlatt Act, we got Jallianwala Bagh. So all of that, whatever little semblance of British fair play and justice was there, was torn to tatters. And after this, it was only a struggle for getting independence. There was no way that we would expect that British will be generous to give us meaningful reforms. So the same thing happened over here at the Boston Massacre for Americans. Got this point? Okay. Then comes Tea Act and the Boston Tea Party. यहाँ पे क्या था? Townshend Act में tea was taxed. ठीक है? Because of all of these protests, the Britishers removed the tea from tax items. But later on, they passed another act which was called as the Tea Act. What did they do in this Tea Act? Around this time in India, this is 1772. Around this time in India, the East India Company has become financially bankrupt. You remember 1764, we had the Battle of Buxar. Okay? And from 1765 to 1772, this period is referred to as period of dual government in Bengal, जहां पे नवाब और ब्रिटिश इन दोनों की सरकार है. This government was the brainchild of that famous guy, Robert Clive. Okay? Now, Clive was a brutal, arrogant, aggressive kind of a person who exploited Bengal to his heart's content, enriched himself, but the company had become financially bankrupt. So this was again a contrast. On one side, people like Robert Clive, Admiral Watson, they have become super rich. But the East India Company that is employing them, that has become financially bankrupt. East India Company ने British government से गुहार लगाई. They requested the British government that please save us. We are about to financially fall completely. So there was shock in Britain's ruling circles. How is this possible? It means there was some hanky-panky stuff. There was corruption that was going on. But nevertheless, अब जो है सो है, it is what it is. We have to save this company. Why? Because the ruling elite of Britain were the investors of this company. तो सरकारें जो हमेशा ऐसी चलती है ना, रूलिंग एलिट्स को प्रोटेक्ट किया जाता है. तो फिर सरकार ने एक एक्ट पास किया जिसका नाम है टी एक्ट. दिस टी एक्ट गेव एक्सक्लूसिव राइट्स और मोनोपोली टू whom? To East India Company in tea trade across the British Empire. Okay, पूरे ब्रिटिश एम्पायर में only East India Company can do tea trade. Clear, everyone? Against this, Samuel Adams and his Sons of Liberty fellows, they did that very colorful and innovative protest which is called as the Boston Tea Party. You remember that Boston Tea Party from your school times? No? Okay. So Boston was like their Bombay, their natural harbor, most important port. Okay? बॉस्टन के अंदर में ये चाय की जो ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी की शिप्स हैं वो वहां पर आती थी. सैमुअल एडम्स और उनके फेलो जो सारे रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे, दे ड्रेस देमसेल्व्स अप as red Indians, native Indians, and they went to the Boston port, got over the ships and threw all the tea into the Atlantic Ocean. ठीक है, सारी चाय जो है वो फेंक दी. And then they danced and raised slogans and everything on the ship deck at the Boston port. This was infamously called as the Boston Tea Party. Now this was a symbolic protest against British law. It was a protest that highlighted that the Americans were now not happy subjects of the Britishers. By wearing the costume of red Indians, it wanted to give a political message. क्या message था? The message was that Americans identify now with their land rather than with the British government. देखिए, पहले ये सारे white लोग कहाँ से आए थे? Originally they had come from Europe, from Britain particularly, है ना? तो इससे एक एक्सपेक्टेड था कि इनकी लॉयल्टी कहाँ होगी? टू देयर मदरलैंड होगी. बट ये सबको भी 3 जनरेशंस हो गई थी. एंड 2-3 जनरेशंस इज अ लॉन्ग इनफ टाइम फॉर पीपल टू डेवलप लोकल अफेक्शन. By wearing that red Indian ka suit, these people emphasize that we identify with our land rather than with Britain. Do you get this? This was the Boston Tea Party. Okay. Since there were some technicalities over here, I'll give you 30 seconds to read through these points so that you're clear about it. Take your time and read through all the points, please. Aishwarya, are you able to understand? And other students who are there online? Why in the chat box, guys? Okay, clear? Shall we go ahead? Right. Now we go towards the war. Okay. What happens over here? These acts, sorry, after the Boston Tea Party, there was a huge hangama in British Parliament. कि भाई इनकी मजाल कैसे हुई कि ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट के लॉ के खिलाफ में they protest like this. these American people need to be taught a lesson. Americans were called as Yankees. अभी भी बोलते हैं, लेकिन उस जमाने में काफी यूज होता था Yankees. So these Yankees have to be taught a lesson. For this reason, British Parliament passed a series of laws to punish the Americans basically. And these laws were called as intolerable acts by the Americans. ये Americans बोलते थे. Intolerable act. And British people used to call this coercive acts. इसमें एक act था which closed the port of Boston for 6 months as a punishment. For 6 months, the port of Boston was closed. Now you can imagine Boston was like their lifeline. All major import export used to happen through Boston, and that port itself was closed for 6 months. Now against all of this, the Americans first met in Philadelphia. 12 out of the 13 colonies attended this. This was called as the First Continental Congress. Congress इस वर्ड का मतलब क्या होता है? बैठक. ठीक है? CON, con. Con मतलब होता है, it's a root word, जुड़ना. Okay? Joining together. इसी से बनता है, देखिए वर्ड congenital. Have you heard of this? When somebody has a disease from birth, con मतलब जुड़ा हुआ होना. Gen is root word for produce. यानी जब प्रोड्यूस हुआ तभी से जुड़ा हुआ है. ठीक है? इसी से वर्ड बनता है consensus. We are together in this opinion. Consensus. Root words थोड़ा सा ध्यान में रखिएगा. I'll keep on sharing them. Americans presented a set of demands to the British Parliament. You see, we don't want war, we don't want conflict. We are happy with you, but you have to change your behavior. What was their demand? Many things, 3 important in that. First, allow us to develop our industry. You can't stop us from developing our industry. और British mercantilism क्या कहता था? Give us only raw material and market, not develop your own industry. Americans are demanding, no, we want industry. Number 2, we must be allowed to freely trade with other countries. तो British mercantilism की तो यहाँ धज्जियां उड़ रही हैं. Britain wants to control your trade, your raw material and your market is mine. Not that of the French, not that of the Spanish. ये हम उसका फायदा उपभोग आम्ही घेणार त्याचं. This was the whole idea. Clear? And third, representation. No taxation without representation. So these were demands which were totally against the idea of British mercantilism. Do you understand this now? Naturally, when these demands were presented, फिर तो कॉलोनी रखने का मतलब ही नहीं है ना ब्रिटेन के लिए. ओके, उनके पर्सपेक्टिव से. सो ब्रिटेन ने कहा कि obviously there is no way that we are accepting these demands, and then let there be war. King George III ने कहा था, the die has been cast, the colonies must now submit or fight. अब कोई और रास्ता बचा नहीं है. Then after this declaration, another meeting was called. This is called as the Second Continental Congress, again in the same city of Philadelphia. Okay. Here the Americans debated, discussed a lot. You know, should we compromise? British army means it was the most powerful army in the world. They have the most powerful navy in the world. Will we be able to, fight and survive? We don't have resources. हमारे पास industry नहीं, munitions नहीं है. How will we fight them? So there was intense debate in this Congress. But ultimately, the Americans decided that no, enough is enough. We will adopt our Declaration of Independence. 4th of July, 1776, on that historic date, that declaration was adopted, drafted by Thomas Jefferson, who later became president also. Okay, and this is the point where 4th of July is celebrated as their Independence Day. अब जंग चली कुछ वक्त. Obviously, Britain is not going to, give up so easily. Britain is going to fight. And for the next few years, the Americans led a long campaign against the British. Guerrilla warfare, Ganimi Kawa. Okay? Guerrilla warfare was used by George Washington because they didn't have such a big army. They did not have artillery, limited artillery था. तो अब कैसे लड़ेंगे? Guerrilla warfare किया. शुरुआत में बहुत पिटे. और ये चीज देखिए दोस्तों, दिस इज द रूल ऑफ लाइफ. बिफोर यू बिकम अ बिग हीरो, बड़ा हीरो बनने से पहले आपको थोड़ा पिटना पड़ता है. विदाउट पिटे कोई दुनिया में बड़ा हीरो नहीं बना है. ठीक है ना? सो व्हेन यू फेस डिफिकल्ट टाइम्स इन योर लाइफ, इट इज गॉड टेलिंग यू दैट आई एम प्रिपेयरिंग यू फॉर अ बिग सक्सेस. पीपल स्टार्ट क्रिबिंग एंड कंप्लेनिंग और दे ट्राई टू फाइंड द इजी वे आउट. छोड़ देते हैं उस चीज को. And that is the biggest mistake that you make. Don't give up. Stick around. I have a student this year, rank 142, Adiba Anam. She had come to me when you were there at that time. Yes. Hanumant, incidentally, during his college times, had visited and he knows that batch where that girl was there. That was 2017-18. She was in first year. She started attending my 3 years batch. For 3 years, she studied along with her BSc mathematics. Her college people were somehow not cooperative. She was a brilliant girl, 92% 10th, 86% at 12th, and then BSc mathematics for UPSC. So they used to tell her that, ये सब UPSC में कोई पास नहीं होता, and you should focus on mathematics. They made her life very challenging. In fact, they used to tell other students that you should not share notes with these UPSC walas, because UPSC walas used to come for tests and stuff. So kabhi lecture wo ho gaya, so don't share notes with them. Teachers saying that, can you believe that? But she persevered. Then after her graduation, she took her first attempt. Prelims did not qualify. Second attempt, prelims qualified, mains did not qualify. Third attempt, prelims qualified, mains qualified, interview ke baad mein not successful. And then fourth attempt, all stages cleared, and she's going to be IAS. So it took her 4 attempts, 5 years in this process, but she has become a IAS officer despite coming from a remote place like Yavatmal. Her father is a rickshaw driver. Okay, from such a destitute background, she's going to be IAS officer. Had she succumbed to what people were telling her, BSc mathematics पे ही satisfied रहो या MSc कर लो and do become a teacher. Okay? It was the easy way out. Was it not? It's always very easy to give up. Always. It just takes, a decision to give up. The difficult thing is to persevere, to struggle. Okay? And when you show that will to fight, कुछ भी हो, मैंने तो लड़ना है. That is when impossible becomes possible, like George Washington showed. He was taking on the most mighty army in the world with a ragtag army. और पिट रहे थे अमेरिकन्स, पूरी तरीके से पिट रहे थे. But they were hanging around. They were not ready to give up. And that is when magic happened. You know what magic happened? On the other side was a very seasoned general by the name Lord Cornwallis. Lord Cornwallis was a very experienced military general. And in the initial battles, he was giving a very tight, slap to the Americans. But Cornwallis ended up making a big mistake. He took himself and his army at a place called as Yorktown. ये exam में नहीं लिखूंगा, but to make you understand how magic happens. He made a very big error by going to a place called as Yorktown, and he kind of locked himself up over there. Now, behind him was the Atlantic Ocean, and in front of him were the Americans. Around that time, the French came in to help and cut off George Washington from the British Navy. So he got sandwiched in between. And the Americans on one side, French on the other side, समंदर है, खाने पीने को कुछ नहीं है. Because of that encirclement, Lord Cornwallis was left with no other option but to accept surrender. This is what I mean by magic happens when you don't give up, when you don't surrender. पिटना तो पड़ेगा बॉस, मार तो खाना पड़ेगा, लेकिन हीरो भी उतने बड़े बनोगे जितना तुम पिटोगे। बात समझ में आई आप लोग की? ठीक है, ओके। सो 1781 लॉर्ड कॉर्नवालिस सरेंडर्ड एट दिस प्लेस कॉल्ड एज यॉर्कटाउन। छोटी मोटी लड़ाई फिर भी चलती रही। 1783 finally a treaty was signed between the British and the Americans in Paris. पेरिस में क्यों? क्योंकि जब भी जंग चलती है तो एक थर्ड पार्टी का बहुत दफा इन्वॉल्वमेंट हो जाता है। तो फ्रांस वाज इन्वॉल्व्ड ओवर हियर एंड पेरिस के अंदर में ट्रीटी साइन हुई। एंड हियर ब्रिटेन सेड टू अमेरिका, जा सिमरन जी ले अपनी जिंदगी। ठीक है, 1783 फाइनली ऑफिशियली ब्रिटिश रूल एंड्स। डू यू अंडरस्टैंड दिस? ठीक है, एक इंटरेस्टिंग स्टोरी इस पिक्चर की है, सोच रहा हूं आपको बता के जाऊं। चलाए? तो लॉर्ड कॉर्नवालिस जो है ना, ये बड़ा ही रईस और अमीर खानदानी बैकग्राउंड वाला बंदा था। He was so powerful in Britain that the British Prime Minister was like his, you know, वो कहते हैं ना बहुत पुराना यार है हमारा, उस टाइप वाला ये बंदा था। And he had a lot of that, you know, narcissism and arrogance. तो he was not willing to surrender, क्योंकि उसकी वो नाक और इज्जत का सवाल था ना। ब्रिटेन में जाके क्या मुंह बताएगा, ये सरेंडर होके आया वो बंदा है। But practically there was no point in continuing the fight also. He understood that as a seasoned general. So he gave an offer to George Washington. He told George Washington that, see, we will surrender, but personally I will not. ठीक है, I will not. तरीका ऐसे होता है कि जो सरेंडर करने वाला जनरल होता है वो अपनी आर्मी के साथ में अपने वेपन्स को ले डाउन करता है, और एक टोकन सरेंडर होता है वेयर द पर्सनल वेपन ऑफ द सरेंडर जनरल इज हैंडेड ओवर टू whom? To the winner general. ठीक है, this is if you've seen the 1971 war, in that war General A.K. Niazi was signing that surrender document, and his personal revolver was given to General Arora of Indian Army. वो जो रिवॉल्वर है वो हमारे यहाँ म्यूजियम में रखा हुआ है, बीच में चोरी हो गया था, मिल गया बाद में। तो वो रिवॉल्वर रखा हुआ है। सो दैट इज लाइक द वे इन विच अ सरेंडर इज डन, और वेपन जो है वो हमेशा रखा जाता है। तो कॉर्नवालिस को ये मंजूर नहीं था कि मैं वेपन जाके मेरा दूंगा। तो जॉर्ज वॉशिंगटन ने कहा कि ठीक है, ये बहुत जिद्दी आदमी है, वॉर से बढ़ जाएगा, एंड यू नेवर नो हाउ सिचुएशन विल चेंज। तो ही सेड ओके फाइन, यू सेंड योर सेकंड इन कमांड, यू सेंड योर 2IC, मिलिट्री में सेकंड इन कमांड कहते हैं 2IC, एंड आई विल सेंड माई सेकंड इन कमांड। तो वो लोग ये प्रोसेस जो है वो कर लेंगे एंड वील एक्सेप्ट दैट एज सरेंडर। दैट्स हाउ लॉर्ड कॉर्नवालिस सरेंडर्ड। ठीक है, और उसी चीज को दर्शाने वाली एक बहुत फेमस पेंटिंग जो है यहाँ पर में आप देख सकते हैं, दिस इज दैट सेम पेंटिंग। बाद में ये ब्रिटेन गया बंदा लॉर्ड कॉर्नवालिस, एंड फॉर मेनी मंथ्स ऑब्वियसली पीपल काइंड ऑफ मॉक यू, तुम्हारी कमांड में ये हुआ वो हुआ। सो ही वॉज वेरी डिजेक्टेड। So his friend, Prime Minister Pitt the Younger, he gave him an offer to redeem his career. By that time भारत में ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी का जो रूल है वो तो एस्टेब्लिश हो गया था। Politically and militarily, East India Company was succeeding, but financially it was collapsing. Despite all the loans and all the waivers that and all the monopolies that were given, ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी बर्बाद हो रही थी, एंड द बिगेस्ट रीजन इन दैट वाज करप्शन। ओके, तो ब्रिटेन में एक आवाज उठी कि भैया ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी को अगर ठीक करना है तो यू विल हैव टू सेंड समबडी फ्रॉम आउटसाइड। लॉर्ड क्लाइव एंड आफ्टर दैट वॉरेन हेस्टिंग्स, बोथ ऑफ दीज वर गवर्नर जनरल्स हु केम फ्रॉम विद इन द ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी सिस्टम, प्रमोशन से। ठीक है, अब चूंकि ये पूरी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ही करप्ट है, तो एनीबडी फ्रॉम विद इन विल बी ऑफ दैट सेम कैरेक्टर वैल्यूज उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का। सो दैट्स व्हाई वी नीड समबडी फ्रॉम आउटसाइड हु इज मोर ऑनेस्ट, हु हैज इंटेग्रिटी, हु हैज हु इज डैशिंग पर्सन। तो किसको भेजा जाए? दैट इज व्हेन पिट द यंगर gave this offer to Lord Cornwallis, and Cornwallis came to India in 1784 as Governor General of Bengal. This is how he comes to India. And when he comes to India, then he designs a lot of system. Modern India में detail में आपको पढ़ाऊंगा. A lot of the systems that we use today are those that जिसका foundation जो है वो Lord Cornwallis ने रखा हुआ है. समझ आई बात आपको यहाँ तक? चलिए आगे बढ़ते हैं. Okay, now grudges of Americans. Why did the Americans revolt or fight? First in that is British mercantilism. पहला पॉइंट हमेशा ये याद आएगा, ये आएगा, याद रखिएगा. British mercantilism. British mercantilism. अब इसमें सब कुछ आ गया. कीवर्ड है, एवरीथिंग इज एक्सप्लेन्ड. ब्रिटिश मर्केंटिलिज्म क्या करता था? British economic interests were promoted at the cost of Americans. Second, control of shipping. Indirectly connected this is connected to mercantilism, but as an additional point, you can say control of shipping. Third, control over American custom duties. Third. Fourth, restriction on American industries. Restriction on what? American industries. Okay. Next, making Americans pay for British burden. Now, these people want to have an empire across the world, and the Americans are expected to pay taxes for that. How is that fair? Fourth. And fifth, taxation legislation without representation. So, we can summarize the grudges of Americans in this manner. I think in the discussion, I've explained all of this in detail, so no need to go further into it. Okay? Clear, everybody? Okay. Let's go ahead. Now let's talk about contribution of thinkers in this revolution. Okay? I have told you, dear students, and some things I consciously repeat in the class because I want them to be, in your subconscious mind very strongly. Okay? First thing, see, that we saw in terms of the intellectual developments of Europe. First thing that you must remember is Renaissance. Okay? After Renaissance, what happens? You have Reformation. Okay? After Reformation, what happens? You have Scientific Revolution. Okay? After Scientific Revolution, what do you see parallelly? You are going to see Enlightenment. What is Enlightenment about? Enlightenment क्या करता है दोस्तों? Okay. Not yet there. Yes, new political ideas. Okay. क्यों आ रहे हैं new ideas? Because the political thinkers are inspired by the scientists. The scientists gave universal laws that led to betterment of mankind. So these people also felt that we must give new thoughts, ideas, laws which will be based on reason, rationality, so on and so forth, which will lead to betterment of mankind. ठीक है? तो अब इन्होंने अपना दिमाग का धुआं बनाना स्टार्ट कर दिया, एनलाइटनमेंट, एंड दे केम आउट, उस मंथन में से, आउट ऑफ दैट चर्निंग came out new political ideas which are at the base of the world that we live in today. Why are we studying this now? This is the reason. What are these ideas? Now this is not comprehensive, but I'm just giving you some taster. First important thinker in that is John Locke. Okay? What idea did John Locke give? John Locke spoke about the concept of natural right, नैसर्गिक अधिकार. What is meant by natural rights? Natural right means that human beings are not like animals. By virtue of being human beings, we have certain rights that must be enjoyed at all cost. These rights are natural, which means no state, no parliament, no law, no constitution, no judiciary, no religion has given these rights. By virtue of being a human being, we possess these rights. And therefore, these rights cannot be taken away from an individual. Got this idea? Okay. Do we believe in this today? Yes, no, answer? We believe in this. The entire, legal system across the world, exceptions rahenge hamesha, but generally speaking, believes in this idea. In the good old times, Louis XIV could tell कि इस आदमी को उठाओ और इसको जो है वो किले की दीवार पर से कैटापल्ट में फेंक दो. This is how people were punished. Okay. Can that be done today? No. Why? Because every human life is precious. We, like Indian judicial system, we go to extremes. Ajmal Kasab ko bhi, we gave a fair trial. Right up to Supreme Court, we give trial. वो भी कम पड़ा तो even terrorists, like for example, was that Kashmir ka fellow who was given phansi last not Kasab was not, I'm forgetting his name, very famous guy. So right up to the president's appeal, everybody is allowed to go. Why? Because we respect this idea. Do you understand this? Entire human rights. Even if, say, somebody is a stateless person, Rohingyas, for example, they also have certain rights. You got this idea? Natural rights. इसके बाद में नेक्स्ट थॉट आता है मॉन्टेस्क्यू का. मॉन्टेस्क्यू ने बोला कि yes, the idea of natural rights is appropriate, but expecting a Shivagamini to uphold natural rights is foolish. If power is concentrated in one person or one institution, then there will be dictatorship and natural rights will never be upheld or respected. So what do we need to do? We need to have checks and balances. Okay? Checks and balances. For that, separation of power is required. So corollary or further development of idea of natural rights is that there must be separation of powers. Do you understand this? Number 2. Number 3, Voltaire takes it even further and he says, even if natural rights are respected, even if separation of powers is there, if religion and state are fused in some way or the other, then there will still be abuse of these natural rights. So if we want to ensure that these natural rights are upheld and respected, religion and state have to be dissociated. Okay? Separation of state and separation of religion. Religion can remain in the confines of one's personal life. That is fine. But when it comes to state, it must be completely devoid of any religious influence. Okay? Do we talk about secularism today? Yes, Indian secularism is not like European secularism, but nevertheless, we treat all religions equally. The state does not base its decisions on religion. Clear? Third point, समझ में आप लोगों को? Voltaire. After this comes Rousseau. Rousseau is called as the prince amongst the political thinkers. His contribution is, the most immense. Everybody is important, but Rousseau in himself, he is one of the greatest thinkers. Rousseau gave his new idea of social contract. Samajik karar. What is meant by this social contract? Social contract का मतलब ये है, people and the state, they have entered into an agreement between themselves. Take for example, when you go from here and you reach the Alka Theatre Chowk, there's a signal over there. Okay? When the light is red, you stop your vehicle. When it's green, that's when you move. Ideally speaking, at least. Okay, in Pune you never know. Okay, but this is what is understood. Why are we doing that? It's a contract between us and the state. We have surrendered some of our rights to the state. I have a right to go anywhere. But if the state tells me that this is a restricted tribal area, you're not supposed to go. You are not supposed to go to Andaman, to those islands where the, Shompens and all these primitive tribes live. So we respect that. We have surrendered our rights to the state. Why? Because we believe that by surrendering these rights to the state will act in our larger benefit. Now, if I don't stop at the signal, maybe I'll reach my college sooner. Okay? But the larger issue is I might face an accident. Okay? So, for larger benefit, we surrender some of our right to the state, and the state is expected to use this for our welfare. This is social contract. Got this point? Rousseau tells that this social contract is totally based on what? Consent of the governed. Which means this is not unilateral. Just because the state has force or power, it cannot compel people to do what it wants them to do. Like take the case of West Bank, Palestine ka issue chal raha hai. Now that is an area that is technically speaking occupied. That's area of Palestine, but Israel is the illegal occupier of that land, and people have to follow Israel's laws. Rousseau क्या बोलता है? Now yes, they are following the laws, but that social contract is not valid. Why? Because it is not based on what? Consent of the people. Clear everyone? Consent is very important. इसी को आगे लेके जाते हैं Thomas Jefferson. I'll talk about this point first. Thomas Jefferson uses this and he says कि अगर social contract में consent is very important. अगर ये consent नहीं दी गई या देने के बाद में रिवोक हो जाती है तो उस केस में वो सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट वैलिड होगा क्या? नहीं होगा ना. ठीक है. दैट सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ऑल्सो गेट्स रिवोक्ड, एंड इफ दैट सोशल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट इज रिवोक्ड देन पीपल हैव अ राइट टू रिबेल. तो उनका जो ये रिबेलियन है, इट मस्ट नॉट बी सीन एज समथिंग इलीगल. इन फैक्ट दे आर डूइंग द मोस्ट मॉरल ड्यूटी. Do you understand this? Okay. Now, why is he talking about this? Because when the Americans did what they did in the revolution, naturally the first instinct of the world was to consider the Americans as the wrong party. How dare they rise up against their legitimate government? Jefferson is giving us a logical and legal argument. He is telling us that a rule is a social contract in which consent is the base. If this consent is not there, Americans ने वही कहा ना, हमारा consent नहीं है, हमारा representation नहीं ले रहे हो, taxation लगा रहे हो, हमारी industry develop नहीं होने दे रहे हो. You're doing so many things against us, so you don't have our consent. And if you don't have our consent, yet you are trying to rule, then we very well have the right to rebel. Got the point now? Okay. Thomas Paine was a British thinker who had migrated to USA. And there in USA, he wrote an essay titled Common Sense. Back then, people used to read. Now, people don't want to read. They just want to watch videos. I read a statistic that in India today, on an average, an Indian spends 7 hours. 7 hours on social media platforms. And you yourself will be surprised. There are many apps which track your mobile for your social media usage. If you try it out, you will yourself be surprised that you will not be very far from this average. Because the small quick logins that we do, right? So those we don't count. But then our time is wasted, our attention is wasted. Time is very important, guys, no doubt about it. Everybody told you this from your school times. But you know what is even more important than time? What is even more important? Any guess? What is something that is even more important than time? Health. Okay, fine. But where we are investing that time? Okay, still more important. What will be the next thing after time? और दिमाग लगाओ. The next most important thing is beyond time. Focus. You're sitting in the library for 6 hours, but focus is not there. So you've given time, but you've not given focus. It is of no use. You might as well go out and have fun if you're not focused. That is actually, because at least you're doing something worthwhile for yourself. Focus is what is most important. And this is what has been lost. I am a teacher for last 15 years, almost now. And I can see the difference from my school times, my college times. And I myself, I'm also guilty. Like everybody else, I'm also on my phone. I also tend to get that urge to check, my notifications. We all are doing that. It's a pandemic. It's really a pandemic. There's this new word that has come about, brain rot. Have you heard of it? Brain rot. Because of use of social media, especially the short form content, your Insta reels and shorts and all of this stuff. See, कैसे होता है जब आप reels देख रहे हो, going like this, like this, like this. You see one reel which is funny, then the next one which is serious, then one which is informative, and 15-20 seconds, you are switching. So your brain is getting so fired up, your neurons are working so intensively and in such contrasting type of content that they start to get, hung. And your focus is being killed because of that. So at least what I'll suggest to you is, I know it's difficult to begin with. I understand and empathize fully. At least what we must do is, don't watch short form content. You want to watch social media, you want to be on social media, you watch long form content. You watch a half an hour video, if you like. Watch something that is good, that will entertain you, inform you, but watch long form. Don't watch short form content. Do you understand? Okay? Chaliye, coming back over here. So I came from common sense. So common sense ke andar mein he argued how illogical it was for such massive colonies to be ruled by a distant small power. He made a series of arguments, very convincing arguments, and this became a very viral piece. Viral not in our sense, of course. Back then, readership was there. People used to read a lot. So this essay was very widely read. And Americans who were fence sitters, people who had not decided whether to support the colonial action or the British government, because they were confused. These fence sitters were convinced because of this essay called as common sense. बात समझ में आई आप लोग की? Okay. Next, the idea of liberalism played a very crucial role in the American Revolution. Since I have discussed this multiple times, I think I need not go into it now. Okay. Republicanism, very crucial point. Republicanism. What is meant by a republic? What is meant by a republic? नहीं, एक फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट है ना, रिपब्लिक फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट. व्हाट्स अ रिपब्लिकन फॉर्म ऑफ गवर्नमेंट? हाँ, वो तो डेमोक्रेसी है. अरे 8th standard civics textbook, वो तो डेफिनेशन आनी ही चाहिए. Normally the answer that I get is head of the state is elected. That is republican form of government. Okay? That is what you're taught in your civics textbooks in school. That's fine. But the real essence of the word republic is not that the head of the state is elected. That's a consequence. The real meaning is there will be no birth-based privileges. Okay? This idea of republicanism is that there will be no birth-based privileges. You've seen that movie, Article 15? If you have not seen it, you must watch it. There's a very interesting dialogue in that movie. This hero, who's an IPS officer, he is, talking with his subordinates, and he's talking about the caste system. They're having a discussion, and one of his, inspector tells him, कि sir, अगर जाति व्यवस्था नहीं होगी तो राजा किसको बनाएंगे? At this, that hero, gets into some confusion, and he talks later to his love interest, who happens to be a very sorted woman, and she tells him कि राजा बनाना ही क्यों है किसी को? Raja, the word itself, the king, it's based on birth-based privilege basically. So why do we want a birth-based privilege in the first place? Now, Americans were inspired by this idea of republicanism, enlightenment se aaya hua, which challenges birth-based privileges. When we say head of the state is not hereditary, is elected, ठीक है? That is a manifestation. कि जब head of the state, the president itself is elected, can the talati be hereditary? Of course not. Okay? So, if the top office is open to all, then every office of the state is open to all. That's a consequence of idea of republicanism, which talks about absence of birth-based privileges. Clear, everybody? Okay? At this point, we have almost completely finished American Revolution. There's just a little bit of discussion of its significance. Now, these points of significance, since we have discussed it in detail, these are very common sense based points. So, next time on Monday when we meet, briefly we'll discuss those points, and then we'll see the French Revolution, which in some ways was also inspired by the American Revolution and the developments there. Okay? Are you all the technicalities, facts? ये आप बाद में भी रट लोगे, वो हो जाएगा. अभी इंपॉर्टेंट है आइडियाज और फ्लो को समझना. Are you able to connect the ideas and flow? That is what is more important. At this point, okay? I'll see you on Monday then. Okay? Sure. All the best to you. There was a question that was asked in the mains on American Revolution, and I'm not remembering it verbatim, but it was something like this: that the American Revolution was a revolt against, लिख लीजिए इसको, ये क्वेश्चन लिख लीजिए. The American Revolution was a economic revolt against British mercantilism. Was an economic revolt against British mercantilism. ठीक है? Now you've understood what was British mercantilism, उसके क्या इंटरेस्ट थे और वो कैसे अमेरिकन्स को हर्ट कर रहा था और फिर क्यों अमेरिकन्स राइज अप होते हैं. डिस्कस. Okay. So assignment for this weekend, you have to write this and come. And by this weekend, Sunday evening tak, try to finish off Arjun Dev Story of Civilization NCRT. You will have some content in it on Indian history, so you can skip that. Just focus on world history. Okay? Sure. See you then. Take care. Bye-bye.